Hello and welcome back. We have a lot to get through, so let's get stuck in, shall we? If you are new here, please consider giving me a like and subscribing to my channel, and comment if there are any questions you guys and gals have or any suggestions on things you would like me to cover or explain. Quickly though, before we move on, you need to know that I'm not a financial advisor. I do not give financial advice, and also that my aim and intent with this channel is to help get you prepared for what I believe is coming. Keep in mind that what is said is while being thoroughly researched and still essentially only my opinion on what I see, what I've heard, and what to do about it. My opinions are not an attack on yours, and I do not abdicate violence of any sort. At this point, any products reviewed or talked about on here are unpaid by any means, which means I can say what I like, and as is my custom, usually blunt as all hell. Right. So, today we're going to take a look at my gardens and explain why they look as they do right now. Then I will try to give an update on what's been going on lately, both abroad and in New Zealand. And after that, I will look at what I see coming in the next, what I see coming next and what to do about it. So settle in, grab a coffee or a drink, and stick with me to the end, because if you do, you will be better informed than your mates and better prepared when SHTF is realised. Before I get into the gardens though, I believe you need to understand one thing above all others. SHTF is happening. We are like the lobster who is alive and has been placed in cold water. The gas is on full, the lid is being put on the water, and the water is heating up. If we were dropped into hot water, we would try our best to get out, but as the majority just see little changes slowly implemented over time, this means there is not going to be a big all of a sudden SHTF collapse. Things will just get a little bit worse every single day until we are today, or where we are today is so far removed from where we will be a year from now. We will have a hard time realizing how good it is today. And understand, I don't think that it is good at all today. I can just see how far down this crapshoot we're gonna fall. Yes, right, hello. Okay, so what I've got for you here is essentially my greenhouse to have a bit of a look at, and I wanted to impress on you guys that gardening isn't an exact science. I'm by no means a professional at it, and in saying that, the garden it's very dynamic. It changes from season to season. There is endless weeding to do, there is soil maintenance, there is pruning, there is tying to stakes and stopping things from breaking, and you're not going to get everything right. I don't get everything right, and I did work in horticulture when I was younger, although it was a completely different horticulture. It was not with edibles. As you can see, I have done very well with the cherry tomatoes this year, and they produce cherry tomatoes all the way from about October right through to June, which is good. In other parts of the garden, since I had my chickens running free range for a time there, I had to take measures to protect the garden from the chickens, which seems a little bit counterproductive, and I have kind of rectified that, because that means that it was very hard to get in there and weed as well. Although somewhat it did help with the snails, which is great. I try to grow mainly heirloom varieties that will go to seed if I let them, and when they do, they will spread seed, so I didn't have to plant any of those daikon radish that you can see there. The last, I planted them once, I used a few seeds for it, and then we eat what we eat, and the chickens get to eat some of the extras as well. And then after that point, if I let them go to seed, they just chuck some more seeds out for the next year and they'll come up again. So that's been very good. Nice to get some carrots. They're looking nice at this point in the year, and I'm recording this in spring. of 2022, but this video that you're seeing is from March of 2022 at the moment, except for the end part of the video where you get to see what it's like now. A lot of these stuff I do direct seed, and sometimes I don't get the spacing correct and I have to thin it, so I'm trying to look at doing a lot more of it in the greenhouse as a starter and then hardening it off and bringing it out with better spacing. But yeah, as I get better at it, it's going to change again. Probably it always changes, just the way it happens, right? Very proud of the daikon. We like to have a nice duck and daikon soup, which is good. And I like my Chinese cabbages as well because they grow well. As you can see there, you got remains of the cherry tomato as I pulled it out, and it left them everywhere. I just could not eat all of the cherry tomatoes. It was not physically possible, even though we gave heaps away, which is great because a lot of those cherry tomatoes have left seeds now in the soil. And this year, actually after I planted the spinach that I'm planting now, they came back and they grew endless tomato seedlings, of which I've kept the best ones for this next year, and they're just starting to come away now, which is good. As we hit spring a couple of days ago, and by the time we get to the end of this month, those things are going to be half the height of me probably. What else? Oh yeah, just follow the directions on the back of the packet and plant stuff. You should have no problems in doing so. I've got these little pots here that I've been using to essentially give me some extra starters for outside or inside. Yeah, that's generally where we go. In regards to my chickens, I have taken to putting them back in their pen and extending their pen. I've grabbed a rooster for them, and I've had some issues with some complaints about the noise recently, and I'm trying to get a permit for them. I've gone as far as to give them a no-crow collar to quiet them down, and also keep them locked up at night so they don't crow very early in the morning. And he's only a temporary fixture as well. I just want him to essentially give me some more young birds, and then we'll see him for a few weeks every spring possibly. We'll see how we go. This pen has worked out a lot better because the chickens stay in the pen, and then I can get to my gardens, which is generally where we want to be. Keeps things simple, right? And yeah, I suppose that's about it. You can see that my gardens here are doing okay, and a lot of things have been left to seed. We just can't eat all of what I produce, and I don't have a lot of gardens, so it's useful. And the chickens give us plenty of eggs as well. But yeah, that's generally that part of that. Shall we get back to the rest of the video then? Oh, not quite yet. Let's have a look. Yeah, we've got some nice spring onions in there. We've got some nice cauliflower growing, ready to go out in the bigger garden to get to its full size. And yeah, that's about that, I think. Let me know what you think in the comments. Right, let's jump back in. You saw in the video I have my backyard chickens, and I've had them for a while, years, with no issues. In the last few days I went a step further and tried to grab a rooster to join them. So this year my older ones, who are laying very little now, can essentially become chicken soup, and I will have their new offspring to bolster my flock. So on Saturday I picked one up. Not hard to do if you have family that have farms and chickens. That morning when I let him out into the aviary I have built to house my flock without them eating my gardens. He crows his head off for hours. Then he settled in until the next morning, a Sunday morning. He started to crow at 5 a.m. He was loud. And he kept going because it's a new environment with chickens, and the neighbours have a lot more chickens than I do, so he was excited. And yes, very loud. So I had a quick search for information on to find out what could be done. I settled on a two-pronged solution. Stage 1, direct fit my rooster with a DIY no-crow collar, which basically limits how far he can expand his diaphragm, thus limiting total air inflation, which lessens the volume and frequency of his crow. For anyone wanting to know, all you need to do this is a couple of bits of 50mm thick Velcro fastened between his beneath his neck feathers, leaving no more than the thickness of sort of a Bic pen between his neck and the collar. In other words, you want him to be able to eat and drink and vocalize and even crow. We just want the volume lowered so that it is not noise pollution. Secondly, roosters crow in the morning mainly. I mitigated this by adding some doors to my hen house and shutting and locking them once they're roosting in the evening, and then opening it and letting them out again at 8 a.m. when most have gone to work. That avoids him crowing at 5 a.m. as he did on Sunday morning, because it's still dark inside their hen house, and this worked successfully today. With that said, one of my neighbours already made a noise complaint, and subsequently some of our council members came and said, "We have had a report that you have a rooster here and it's against the bylaws. When can you get rid of him?" And yes, that is the way they phrased it. So me being me, I thought, okay, well, I'd better check the bylaws. The bylaws where I am say just up the road and on the outskirts of town you can have a rooster, and I am not on the outskirts, but I'm not in the CBD or close to it either. It also says in other parts of my city you can have, if you have a permit and meet certain criteria. Basic stuff, clearly designed to prevent one house owning 20 roosters that breed and crow and fly everywhere, right? So I have applied to keep my rooster, as I believe here's the difference between having eggs only and a diminishing supply as your hens age, and a renewable food source also. I will let you know how it turns out, whether I have to take him back or if he gets to stay. My point is this: the council staff that came to visit me had an agenda. Their agenda was set by the complainant. Make them get rid of the rooster because it woke me up one morning. It would have been fairer and more impartial to instead say roosters without permits are not permitted. And if you're watching and it woke you up at 8 a.m, I hope the collar mitigates this. Otherwise, try some earplugs. Most people work during the day, and if you work at night and are genuinely affected, I suggest you find your own solution that doesn't involve trying to place the limitations of your life over mine. Okay, so let's move on to an overview of what has occurred since last we spoke, or rather since my last video. A few days back we had a protest. It was a peaceful and doesn't seem to have achieved a lot. The protesters held a mock court outside Parliament and held trials for politicians for crimes against humanity. I believe those tried were most found guilty. Our politicians had a laugh about it in Government House afterwards, which they had the media report on. If I were a politician, that would make me nervous, and justifiably so. That same protest is the one they did not want to end up on social media, especially if you have a following. The police and the government conspired to keep one reporter from Australia away. Avi Yemeni has a following of 750,000, and our government asked our police and Interpol to seek advice from Australian authorities as to what information they had about Avi that they could use to fit New Zealand's definition of poor character, specifically to deny Avi entry into New Zealand to prevent him from reporting on the protest. Once more, they kept quiet and basically denied that they did so after the document was leaked, proving they did, and then Another of our corporate and political puppet media organisations here then ran a story about trying to find the mole who leaked their corruption. With all this going on, is it any wonder that people are starting to ask why we let them carry on? Now, we need to remember, in 1672, the Dutch Prime Minister Johan de Witt, having failed his people in wars with England and France, a starving mob violently ousted him from office and some say ate parts of him. This is what happens when the population you govern moves from protest to outright riot, and all that stands between peaceful protest and mob action is 12 meals. In Auckland, our largest city, ram raids continue, and jewellery stores are being robbed daily. This is how it starts. Where the cost of living is the highest is where it begins, as those people are squeezed the most from inflation's effects. Across the ditch, I heard that there are problems sourcing medical supplies from China, and the supply chain disruptions are intensifying. Over here, in almost all supermarkets, products are beginning to disappear, and there are quantity restrictions on many items. They say quantity limit, but that is rationing. The Financial Times reports that the Nord Stream gas pipeline between Russia and the EU has been suspended indefinitely, which will send energy costs soaring. At first they said there was a problem with it. Now it comes to light that it is a response to sanctions placed upon Russia by the EU. While back at home, a new rollout of smart meters for electricity is being introduced. Mark my words, if you can, and you can, say no thanks to these. Now, they will protest and say you have to phone your energy readings in, but I would rather phone in my reading than give them the ability to ration the electricity in my house. Also, here in New Zealand, the government is once again expanding its powers. Now, yes, we have a problem with crime here in this country, and Australia's 501 deportees policy has directly increased crime levels here. For those who don't know what that is, it's a policy that states if a crime is committed in Australia, they look into where that person came from. If he was, say, born in New Zealand and migrated with his family to Australia, as early as age 5, then commits a series of crimes in his 20s or 30s, by example, they then deport him back here even though their system created his criminality. Where we failed is to just say they're rehabilitated and let them go free, because they just joined the gangs and realised our police in general carry less guns than they do in Australia, and then continue their life of crime. That, mixed with a rapidly lowering standard of living and growing inequality between the rich and the poor, and the sad fact that you can work 40 or 50 hours here only to have 4/5 go on rent and still be poor, has increased crime. Simply put, if you can't get ahead legally, people are going to try to do so illegally. What that means is that this is a problem that is going to increase, not decrease. So our government has given itself the power to search and seize anything, essentially without warrant or even solid justification. Just being suspected is cause enough, as if you're a child and they are the bully who says, "Give me that, you can't afford it if I can't." The intent is to target the wealth of the gangs, but it is so broad that if you're suspected of being associated with any criminal, they can search and seize anything they want just by saying, "We suspect this item or object of value is the proceeds of someone else's crime." I ask you, what is the difference between that and the Germans saying you're guilty of giving aid to Jewish people in the 40s? So they named this the Criminal Proceeds Recovery Act, and the government expects it can seize $25 million worth of property and money from those it had essentially not been able to tax, including taking from their KiwiSaver. Moving on, I want to talk to you about meat. Here in New Zealand we produce a large amount of meat, but as I said in another video, most of that goes overseas. You may have noticed that while everything else in the supermarket went up at a shocking rate, meat until now has stayed a little bit more reasonable. I mean, it did go up, but it wasn't the 20% that other things have. Now it is starting to climb in earnest. But why? Well, in other parts of the world they are having major droughts. That is leading to ranchers and livestock farmers sending huge quantities of their livestock to the slaughterhouse, which in turn are a lower quality of meat than what we produce here, and as such we import it and sell it in our supermarkets. Well, the backlog of animals being sent to slaughter due to the inability to feed them kept the prices of beef for a long time especially low, and the lack of workers to process that meat extended that for nigh on a year. But that is coming to an end now. While we still export our meat, as their local markets become scarce they will be willing to pay ever increasing prices. Encompass that with the fact that meat companies are not supplying the domestic market mainly. I know this for a fact as I worked in one. Previously, we send 12 containers a day of our meat away overseas and kept one pellet for the local market. Now, I don't know if that is true of all meatworks, but it was the reality when I worked there. So, in the coming months, expect to see the price of our export meat to rise and the supply of other countries dwindles, and the price of local meat here to go up for the exact same reason. Now, there is an ag production census going on right now where the government is trying to find out exactly what is being produced. There could be nefarious motives behind it. Maybe they will say to reduce emissions, lower animal numbers, which is likely, but also I believe this is aimed at equally at nitrate fertilizers for our crop production as an environmental and water quality measure. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm not against having good quality water. I am against excessive regulation. I believe that centralization of power is inherently wrong. Local bodies should have more power and control, and central government should have far less. At some point it will have to be made to give up its powers in favor of local governments getting more done. I see moving forward a further raising of the OCR. Inflation, both local and imported, will continue to rise. Shrinkflation also. Prices for food are going up. Prices for houses are going down and will continue to do so. And as international interest rates rise, what else rises? Is the very interest our governments have to pay on their own books. This is what I believe is leading the charge to tax or seize more from you than ever before. How do I know this? Well, a simple search of interest rates from the IMF, which is who lends us money, and by us I mean New Zealand amongst other countries, shows that the interest rates have gone up for governments also. So right around the time we took out those $50 billion loans for COVID, the rate was about 1% roughly. So the interest on that loan of $50 billion was around the 500 million mark. Now the interest rate is 2.6%. That interest is now $1.3 billion. So now you can see, or start to see, why they are searching for more tax revenue. So in short, problems for the government means problems for the people it governs. And so now we come to the crux of today's video. Over the last 3 years, we have lost as many freedoms and had so many restrictions imposed upon us that the argument can be made that there were more unnecessary regulation in the last few years than there was in the last 50. From lockdowns to health mandates to taxes and surveillance, both digital and conventional, to changing definitions of vaccine, to loss of freedom of speech, to deport upon suspicion to open collusion and corruption and search and seizure expansion, taxes on top of taxes, restrictions in what you can buy, restrictions on how much you can buy, and the loss of your basic right to free speech and free and impartial press, which has been swapped for a large wing of propaganda, I would posture that this country is in decline, and sooner or later push will come to shove, and we will see if the people are the cattle the power of late expect we are. So again, what should you be doing about it? Well, reducing your debt if you can, and getting basics like food and water and shelter sorted out as best you can, and get a bug out bag, especially if you live in Auckland, Wellington or Christchurch. I would, for this purpose, say Hamilton is similar to Auckland in its potential to become a hotspot for violence and looters, because as things get worse, this is where the riots will begin. If you don't intend to join them, you should go elsewhere and take things with you. There will be looting. If you are bugging in, be prepared to defend yourself. A community of like-minded individuals will be advantageous. Your bug out bag is also necessary if the disaster is not a civil uprising, but even flood or a volcanic eruption or an earthquake or tsunami. A lot of people around the world think New Zealand is the ideal location, but remember, we do have active fault lines, especially on the east coast of the North Island, where subduction lines can cause megathrust earthquakes and huge tsunamis. We have volcanic hotspots like Auckland and Rotorua and Taranaki even potentially. You have to prepare because the government is spending all of its time on turning you into cattle and not nearly enough time planning for and assessing the risks of what is actually happening. And that's all without even mentioning the very real risk of being drafted for a war that is going to go major in the not too distant future. And so as we look forward to the future, I say your life is very much in your own hands, and the government you thought was here to help you is actually here to control and hinder you at every step. So please go and get prepared. If you liked the video, please subscribe and comment, and if you have anything to add, let me know what you're seeing where you are. Stay safe and get prepared, everyone.